Okay, so the special meeting has been called for one particular item, first reading of the revised pre-K through 12 English Language Arts curriculum. Everyone received their materials, and in case for the public, everything is available on our website in our meetings area and along with our agenda for all the backup materials. And before I open it up to the board, I'm going to offer an opportunity for our superintendent, Mr. Testani and Ms. Goss, to open with any remarks that you wish to share with us before the board engages in our discussion.
Thank you. I just want to say we have some members of the team that worked extremely hard over the last several months to put this document before you for the first read tonight. I just want to say thank you and much appreciated for all your hard work and your dedication to the students here in Fairfield. I also want to say I think that as information is being released by the State Department of Ed and talking to some colleagues, I think we made the right decision in moving forward with new curriculum and a resource that teachers can utilize and rely on moving forward. As many of the waivers, as was mentioned about a year ago as we sat on why we didn't put a waiver in, are being denied by the State Department of Ed. So I'm glad that we didn't waste this opportunity over the last 12 months to get ahead of the curve and be prepared as we move to the next phase in preparation of documents and professional learning for our staff, so we can be prepared for the start of next school year. Jenny?
Good evening, everyone. Executive Director, Pre-K through 12 Literacy, Janine Goss. I want to thank you for this opportunity very much. I do first want to also thank teachers. I want to thank our teachers for all their support, especially over the past couple of weeks. They've worked especially hard to come together on short notice. They provided feedback. They have continued to work on the documents to make them even better. And they have had such positive conversations about ELA instruction and for our future. And I do want them to know they are very much appreciated and very much valued for the work that they do each and every day as they do prepare our students for the next grade level. We do have, as Mr. Testani says, in the audience today, Maria Magalhaes is here. She is our English learner, multilingual learner teacher for Burr and Jennings. I want to thank her for coming. She's also one of our curriculum designers, as is Julie Sherwood. She is Burr's literacy coach. Jenny Ingram is here from Ludlow. She's the high school English teacher and department liaison. Maura Shields Verna is here. She's our language arts specialist at Tomlinson, and so is Carrie Jockers from Roger Ludlow Middle School, our language arts specialist. I hope I didn't miss anybody behind me. Of course, we have Mick here. Mick McGarry is here, who has been such a supporter of this work. Thank you, Mick. And also Julie Heller. Julie will come up soon. She's our ELA 612 director, program director, who also worked tirelessly alongside all of the teachers these past couple of weeks and months. So before we get started, I did want to highlight for you all a few changes that were noted in red at the last meeting, just to kind of summarize what you saw last time. And then I will give you some highlights about this time, and then we'll do whatever you'd like in terms of questions, or we can actually go page by page if you need to, because I have every page written with every revision and the reason behind the revision. So we're ready for that. So at our last meeting, a few changes were noted in red. And the first one was a minor edit on all K-5 documents, as well as pre-K and 612 core. We changed that word good to skilled. You saw that the last time, so that the course essential question reads, what do skilled readers do? And not what do good readers do? Okay, so we're not going to talk about that again. You're going to still see it in red today. In the resources section of each module, if there was a social studies unit connection where the ELA module and the social studies unit would support one another in terms of vocabulary and building of background knowledge, we were forward thinking and we used the title of the units that the state has put out. So we crossed those off and we put the titles of the units that you all have approved. So in the future that will need to be changed, but for now it will be easier for even teachers to follow because those are the social studies unit names that have been approved. Last but not least, we added in red the Rigby leveled reader set. and I linked it there. This way you can see what the titles were. These have been purchased to support small group instruction. Many of these are long reads and chapter books. So that's what we saw last time. And now, just very briefly, I want to share with you some of the major changes. We'll start with K-5 right now. Pre-K, no changes. But in K-5, we reordered many of the concepts based on the resource in terms of grammar. So this way the content was maintained rather, but we prioritized certain ones because they came up in different modules along the way. So for example, if there are standards, grammatical standards, structures in K1, 2, but not in 3, then we needed to make sure students had mastered it by grade 2. So here's a perfect example. So in terms of the singular and plural nouns, now we're really getting into the weeds, but I want you to understand some of the decisions. In singular and plural nouns, they are prioritized in the standards in grades K and 1, but not in 2. So we spiraled to those in 2 of the modules in grade 2 anyway, just to make sure students had mastered it. And then we also spiraled it in grade 3 in 1 of the modules. So we were very intentional about that. We did a grammar's skills trace to be able to see how the progression occurred from kindergarten all the way on up. Now, what else did I want to tell you? Okay, all right, so it's like sort of a gradual release. So this is where the bulk of the redlined information comes from, okay? Another major change was the alignment with the language standards. So now if we made changes to the concepts, then I had to make sure the standards aligned. So you're going to see in the language section that some standards were crossed out and some were added. So this way they matched the content that was being taught. I mean, that just stands to reason. Now, finally, in a few instances, we also changed the writing task at the end of the unit. Maybe we did this from an informational to an opinion piece. And we did that, when we did that rather, we had to change the writing standard to match it. Those were the major ones. So I think what happened was these are integrated units by design. So even though at the end of the unit, a student may be writing an opinion piece, but throughout the unit, the student is reading and writing in different genres along the way. But the writing process piece, the opinion piece, is the one that we decided to prioritize. And so we may have had to make that adjustment to the standard. Now, there is one redlined part of a language standard that we crossed out in kindergarten. It's found on page 51, and that was done in error. So I'm going to revise that and add it back in because it is in alignment with the grammar content on page 56. This is in kindergarten only. It was simply an error. Other than that, those are the major changes that were consistent throughout all of the K-5 documents because I think we should start there. And like I said, I can go page by page, or I can just bring to your attention some of the most important per grade level, or I can simply just answer some questions.
Okay. I'll open up to the board then. We'll go right to questions. Anyone? Anything you want.
We can bring Julie up too if you're ready for 612.
I kind of have a conceptual question. I don't want to open a can of worms too early. All right. Well, no, I mean, this is something we've talked about in other contexts and in other meetings, and I kind of like you to, related to high school English. I'd kind of like you to talk a little bit more about why you feel it's not as necessary to have a list of required readings versus the list of challenging texts and choose from this list. Again, we've talked about this before, but if we're talking about kind of everyone having an assured experience and moving from one grade to another, like I'm not super comfortable with the idea that somebody can skip through a year having a completely different literary experience than somebody else, and then next year for those two students having nothing to talk about, or at least compare and contrast, but not being exposed to the same material. So I just, again, broad conceptual question. It's a thing that nags at me a little bit, just like some clarity around your thinking.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you referring to the 612 levels or K-5?
In high school, yes.
Very good.
So I had a number of conversations with English teachers here. I've talked about this subject throughout my career, by the way, as an English teacher and as an English leader. And one of the teachers at Ludlow, I think, put it best when she said a couple of things. One was that as we continue to align everything we do with our standards and looking closely at the high school standards, you will note that they don't identify any required text. In fact, they don't identify any required authors except for William Shakespeare. So we have him named specifically in our curriculum documents. And the other point that this teacher made that I want to share with you is that she felt very strongly, and I agree with her, that really it's an error to identify any particular required text because we're privileging one voice, one member of a particular community over many other voices. But be that as it may, you know, we are trying to find a place in the middle where we can all, you know, find our happy spot, if you will. And we identified some of those texts that we are already using. Pretty much everyone in grade 9, for example, is already reading Romeo and Juliet. Grade 10, they're already reading Macbeth. So we felt comfortable moving forward with that one step, but it's still not completely aligned with many of our philosophies about required text. It is, however, aligned with Common Core.
Privileging one voice formulation bothers me a bit. I understand, I think, the philosophical angle that is coming at us from, but we do that all the time. That is kind of our job as educators, is to present material to our students and have them interact with that material and discuss feelings and thoughts about that. We do that in a lot. We have textbooks where we do that, and I don't know a textbook in social studies necessarily is privileging a voice. It's a different. I get where it's kind of a different argument when you're talking about a literary piece. I just, you know, one of the things that I've noticed kind of for my own kids throughout the years is I think that there's been a broad focus on getting kids to read and saying whatever you want to read is good. And I'm pro reading. I'm very pro reading. But it's also our job to direct and to expose to various things. Those are choices that we make. Those choices that teachers make. And if teachers make different choices, I don't know how that is necessarily to the student body's benefit if they're all different choices. Again, I'm not making a specific suggestion here. This is something through the years that has weighed on me a little bit, and I don't know quite how to adapt to it. But I understand the place that you're coming from. I will say, just as I'll leave it to other people. I noticed in one of the things that Oedipus Rex had been crossed out, but you had just moved it from one list to another. And just to put my particular opinion in the arena here, that is the most important work of literature in human history. That is the most important work of literature in human history. So please
No
keep
comment.
that. I'm happy to have that discussion at whatever time and place.
Even though we're having this discussion, just so you know, in grade 6 all the way through grade 12, required text have been written into the curriculum. There were compromises made.
But I again, I'm thinking about the high school levels.
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Just really quick to piggyback Mr. Peterson. So when we're talking about the high school without a set reading kind of list, those kids in high school are going to be prepared for that next level? Because I know at that next level, when you sign up for an English class, you have required books to read still. Are these kids going to still be prepared for that next level?
Absolutely. And we do have a menu of texts for each of the full year courses, grades 9 through 12. There's a menu of texts there. And, you know, really, it's what's more important beyond the text is what teachers do with the text in the classroom. So, you know, English is a skills-based discipline. If you read the standards, you will see all of our standards are talking about skills, not content and not specific books. The books are really just the vehicles for which we teach students how to be analytical, how to discuss and share ideas and consider deeply what they're learning about the human experience, what they're learning about groups of people all around the world. So we are using literature as a vehicle to teach kids how to be critical readers and thinkers and communicators. So that's really the important part. And so, yes, I can say with full confidence, with each grade level, they're being fully prepared for the next grade level and then beyond. We hear from many students. A number of teachers have shared with me, students reach back out to them after they've gone on to college and they've said, I can't believe how well prepared I am. Kids in my class are asking me for help and guidance with not only my reading and understanding, but also with my writing. So I think the teachers at Fairfield Public Schools in both high schools, they're doing an outstanding job.
Mr. Peterson.
Did you just say literature is a tool? Kind of where's the room for art's sake? Is there no room for that? Is there no emphasis on that?
Certainly,
Where is
some of
the-
that reading does take place for sure. So when students are looking at a piece of poetry or they're looking at a particular line in a novel, they're looking at, you know, the artistic value of the aesthetic value of what they're reading and they're thinking about.
Where is the instructional emphasis on that?
I don't know that there is an instructional emphasis on art for art's sake per se. We are using the stories that we bring into the classroom to shape your children into critical thinkers, critical readers, you know, students who are able to go out into the world as global citizens and contribute as well as take in what they're learning about the world.
I have a lot of thoughts about how you have phrased this. And frankly, I was unprepared for somebody to say aesthetic appreciation of a work of literature is kind of a byproduct.
Why don't you think about that? Well, do you want to keep going, Mr. Peterson? You want to come back?
I do want to keep going, but I probably should be stopped at this point.
Yeah. Mrs. Guernsey.
So thank you. And thank you again to all the teachers that worked tirelessly on this project. I mean, this was an enormous amount to tackle. And I think that like looking for perfection in this product is probably not something that we should be doing. And you know, maybe I have a lot of questions, especially about the older grades, but we're on K through 5 now. But one thing that I've just been thinking about here tonight is this idea of because we're providing these lists that teachers can choose from, and we're talking about the art of literature, this ability for teachers really to curate the products that are available to their students, which I think is a really good thing. It kind of like, it can also scare me a little bit. I mean, I have 2 boys and I don't want for a teacher of, you know, if they're in a class with 23 girls and 3 boys to just pick like coming of age, like girl books. So, you know, there's a little, you know, no, I'm being serious. Like there are some issues I think with like curatorial choices that can be complicated, but I think I really trust that our teachers will be able to do that work and do it well. And I know based on the experiences that my own children have had, certainly the sort of, I've just heard their teachers talk about the beauty of writing. And so I hope that that's something that's not lost, even if it's not in these documents, which tend to be so just dry and so removed from the teaching. I just have a lot of like faith that hopefully will happen. I mean, that's not what we're voting on. So anyway, that's kind of like where my thoughts are now, and I just wanted to share them. Thank you.
Mrs. Flynn.
Hi there. First of all, thank you very much for the documents. It was helpful as a new board member to have such a detailed document that really provided us with the information we needed. But I did have a few questions. These are kind of specific to mostly 6th through 8th, but 8th grade. One's a little bit in the weeds and one then is a little more conceptual. When you talk about skills, I appreciate it so much and how it's built in as a parent who's seen, younger students progress into our middle schools. It's vital, but also talking about the experiences in our classrooms. And in Unit 4, in 8th grade, which just for reference, so anyone has, it's page 648 in the document. In the speaking and listening section, it redlines through an experience that I've heard about as a parent anecdotally, which was an interview process with Holocaust survivors. And in the new redline version, it is now a recording and reflection. So if you could just speak to the methodology of how that came to be, I'm sure there's a thought process behind that, but I'd love to hear it.
I'll offer you what I know, and then if Maura or Carrie want to speak, I'll let them do that as well. So I did speak with the 8th grade teachers when we were looking through this entire document when we were revising it. And we talked a little bit more about that. So I think several years ago during this unit, they did actually have Holocaust survivors come in and speak. I don't know if that's happened recently, and I'm sure it's happening less and less, sadly, in schools. Because we are losing that valuable asset. So, in terms of these amazing survivors. So I think what we tried to do there was to kind of pull back from that because frankly, we might not have the ability to continue with interviewing people. So, but we didn't want to lose all of that of listening to people talk about their experiences, they're reading Elie Wiesel's work. And so to be able to listen to him, I think it was on the Oprah show where he spoke, I think was the next best alternative.
And I really do appreciate that answer, and I don't want it to be taken as that we thought it was being removed. I mean, I think anyone logically knows that population is sadly leaving us, and as someone who had grandparents and friends and had that experience in public school, I think it's vital. I would just maybe impart to you that I think part of the meat of that and the core of that is that listening and that experience. And if there could be some alternative found, I think sadly we live in a world that has a lot of experiences that we can impart on our children. And I think it's vital to, keep that experience piece in it. But just a little more broadly, could you speak to, you talk a lot about the alignment throughout, just a little bit about that alignment from 8th grade to college prep and honors. We see a lot of diversifying in course offerings at the middle school. Anecdotally, I can say that that's challenging for a lot of families, and it's especially challenging for students who aren't inclined in math and can't really find a home to, focus their energies. And, putting even that aside, are we seeing our children prepared from 8th grade to 9th grade? I know that that's been something that I've heard from parents quite often.
So to answer that, I would like to direct you back to, I think it's page 632, 633, if you want to look at the very beginning of the 8th grade document. So, but the teachers, 8th and 9th grade teachers and I came together and we looked at this alignment piece and we tried to, we had a conversation about how we can make it more explicit. We felt very strongly that the courses were aligned and students were prepared to move into either the 9 college prep or 9 honors class, whichever they felt more comfortable with. And in fact, when we looked at the data from last year's students body who went into 9 honors from both buildings, all 3 buildings, excuse me, into both high schools, I think there were maybe 9 students, if I'm recalling correctly, who got below a B-. So the students are doing very well when they shift into that 9 honors class. But I direct your attention to the course overview because this is where we really try to lay it out. So if you were to take this beginning of the document with the 9 CP and the 9 honors, you could lay them side by side and you would see exactly what it looks like. When we're looking at reading overall throughout the 8th grade ELA class, reading in 9 CP and our college preparatory class and 9 honors. And so I tried to lay it out very succinctly that way. The teachers helped me with this. And then we also went back and looked at the standards again. So there's an example.
Thank you for having that all in hand. Great.
There is an example in there that actually shows how it ratchets up appropriately from one grade level to the next. So if you read the course overviews, those will be helpful.
I'll dig in and try and find those. And if you have that teacher-based data on that grade leveling and any other data, I think that may be helpful. I know, if we're looking at, our math students, you can see it borne out in data that differentiation in course level is having an impact. So if we're seeing the same thing in English organically through the curriculum, wonderful. But if we're not, I would love for that to be something that we watch as this course and implementation progresses. Thank you all really so much for the work.
Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
So just, we only got the curriculum on Monday, so that's when I started reading it. And first I want to say regarding the pre-K through 5, thank you so much for the changes that were made, for hearing me out with some of the, obviously I didn't contribute all of the suggestions, but I really do think it's an improved document. And so thank you for that. I'm more than ready to vote on that as soon as the chair puts that on an agenda. I appreciate that. Regarding grades 6 through 8, I appreciate the inclusion of the new graphic novel in grade 6. That looks like a really interesting inclusion. I don't know the book, I just looked it up, but it looks like it'd be very interesting, very relevant to the students of being new in a school, a different medium. I think that looks fantastic. I still have 3 pages of questions that either were not addressed from what I submitted a few weeks ago, or were new based on things not being done. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't start with picking up where Mr. Peterson left off. I, with 33 years in the profession, resoundingly reject any notion that high school English is not an opportunity for teaching content, that it is a skills course. It is such a missed opportunity, and more to the point, with everything we've just been doing in the past year regarding the science of reading, how utterly inconsistent with the approach that we are taking pre-K through 5, where we recognize that content and the establishing of that background knowledge, and how literature, nonfiction and fiction can be a vehicle for doing that. That's content that I'm talking about. Why bother with night in 8th grade? Let's just get rid of night and let's substitute any one of a number of books. I would stridently argue against that. It is a perfect opportunity, consistent with grade 8 American history, that we are taking an in-depth look at an Assyrian experience with the Holocaust. It is a great work of literature. Obviously, the English teachers will do well. It is also going to create a memorable content base for any of our students moving on to high school with the content of the Holocaust and that experience. The Outsiders, a great opportunity, as is noted in the curriculum document, for examining stereotypes, etc. That's teaching content. So we are already acknowledging that we go beyond the Common Core. And yet, even with something like the Common Core, which cites an expectation of 18th, 19th, and 20th century American literature, we require none of that. We require one 20th century book, which is a classic, and which I will also argue, if someone wants to come at me about privileging The Great Gatsby, bring it on. It should be privileged. It is a masterful work of literature that holds up against any judge, except for his work with geography. He was challenged there. But I was very passionate and very explicit, and more to the point, years ago, I and that board fought to get mandated 2 texts per year. And we were promised that that would happen. And we made the mistake of not getting it in writing. There is now no such expectation after a direct promise And so I'm going to have a very hard time supporting this curriculum, 6 through 12, without that. In addition, all of those electives have not one mandated text. Now, I could get maybe for the writing courses that maybe that isn't as essential, but all of those reading courses. So once again, what we've been fighting for in grading in the policy committee for over 3 years is any sense that two different teachers teaching the same course, that there would be that commonality. Not going to happen. They can choose from whatever they want and have two completely different experiences in that room. And I absolutely acknowledge that by adhering to standards and the essential questions, that I'm not saying it's, complete apples and oranges. But just, I'm going to have a real problem with the no mandated text. And I just will repeat, and then I'm going to move on to get at least knock off some of these questions. Any notion that high school English is totally a skills course. That is letting teachers off the hook in a way that I don't think they want to be let off the hook and shouldn't be let off the hook. But going back to some of the questions that came from my review of the curriculum documents, one question I had, and it was something Mrs. Guernsey and Mrs. Jacobson brought up, and maybe they were going to bring it up tonight, I don't know. But they were, especially because they're a little bit, well, no, I don't know about Mrs. Jacobson, a little bit closer to middle school than I am, very concerned about the means with which we prepared our 8th grade transition to 9th grade honors. And so what these curriculum documents do to prepare our students for that transition is lower the standards of grade 9 honors explicitly by reducing the number of challenging texts, acknowledging that the thought of staff is that they're not ready to handle that. And so I know the request from the board had been to increase an opportunity for increased rigor in 8th grade, for increased preparation for the expectations of English 9 honors, noting, as Mrs. Jacobson did, we've got 12 levels of math opportunities in middle school and 3 for English. So I was wondering if someone could speak to the decision-making behind lowering the standards of our English 9 honors.
We actually thought we increased it. So in terms of the text, we compromised. We knew that you did want 2 texts per grade level. We compromised with teachers to have 1 required text. And then we also increased the expectation in terms of how many they were to read from the more complex list, as well as the grade level list. And so that was delineated.
If you can point me to that, because if that were the case, then I have misread something, because based on what I am reading, the English 9 college prep picks any 5 full-length works. Grade 9 has been reduced so that it is only doing 2 from the challenge text list, reduced from 4 of the draft that we saw a few weeks ago. I find it much easier to use all the PDFs because I'm talking about pages 632 is a little scary.
I'm not sure what else to say about 9 honors. I mean, we looked at the course, we looked at your questions, we looked at the overviews, and we considered what students were reading, and we feel that the course is rigorous. I don't think that we reduced the level of rigor or expectation for students.
Jen, while you're looking, can I ask a follow-up? So maybe it would be helpful just to understand why the numbers were changed, if you can speak to that or have knowledge of that.
Actually, if I can point you out, if you look at English 9 honors, and if you look at the new red text, where it says that the students will read 4 at grade level and at least 2 above grade level. Then if you look at the strike-through language in the bottom paragraph, at least 4 of the 6 required texts will be from the challenging text band. We've gone from 4 to 2. I'm not sure how to interpret that other than as lowering standards.
No, I see what you're saying. I don't believe that that was the discussion we had. I remember that we did want to increase for college prep in order for students to have access to the more complex list. It's on page 2, Julie, and 3, if we look at it that way, of the 9 honors.
I don't think the intent, I'm sorry that is struck through. I don't think there was any change in the expectation for students reading at least 6 books. It certainly has not been reduced to reading only 2 books.
I'm not sure if this is willful or not, but you are misunderstanding me. The expectation of 6 has not changed. It has gone from 4 challenging texts off the challenging text list down to 2 for English 9 honors.
I just think I just think that was just slightly in error. I'm glad you caught it if that's the case, but I didn't have any that involved teaching that expectation for above grade level. So I think I appreciate that you caught it. I didn't work on this, but I didn't hear from something.
Yeah, I'm sure that like
I think that's
many of the things that were pointed out, this was a transposed piece of information that probably reflects what it says for 9CP and was copied over and not adjusted on the chart that I worked on.
I actually don't know if, and not that you're raising your hands, if the 2 of you would like to talk about your thoughts, or if you're fine with this now. I just want to find what other questions I want to move on to next.
You mean in terms of the articulation? I spoke to mine. I'm happy to let you look. I feel like I spoke to my concerns. I focused really much on the whole document, appreciate all the work in terms of the editing and the updating and some of the changes that you've mentioned that I think are positive. I've rooted some of this in data and going between pre-K to 12 and pre-K to 12 proposed, digging into the writing standards because that was one of my areas. And, you know, I think that for me, you know, that my focus was on writing and this articulation, or one of my areas. I'm interested in all of it, but for me, middle school in particular, if I go document to document, side by side, and I literally write down all of the standards that are currently listed in our 6, 7, and 8 courses, and then write down the ones that are in the proposed 6, 7, and 8 courses. You know, there's a 72% reduction in writing standards across the 3 courses. If you'd like to speak to that, maybe it's something that I know I didn't miss it because I copied them and added them up and did the division, but that to me is a significant reduction. And was already kind of concerned about that level to begin with. So that's an area of prime concern for me. 3rd grade as well, I mapped those. Most of the other elementaries didn't change that much significantly, but 3rd grade there seemed to be a significant reduction, and I don't know if that's because in 3rd grade that becomes your SBAC first year and you're focusing on the SBAC assessment that year, but there was a 59% reduction in 3rd grade as well. So I'm looking at it pretty data oriented. So if you want to speak to those reductions, it's really the middle school piece that I found a little shocking. But I'm happy to hear with it what you have to say about those.
Through the design process, we prioritize certain standards in certain places. So we elevated standards intentionally depending on the content and the skills that were listed in the documents. So when we did the standards crosswalk, we had to make sure that the standards were addressed, but with advice from the developer of the UBD framework, what we were finding was we were overloading the documents with standards, and then nothing becomes important. So it was intentional that we prioritize certain things. We can take another look at the crosswalk and make sure as changes were made, that gaps were filled and not left out. But that really was the rationale.
Mrs. Finley, yeah, sure.
Can you just, in maybe a little bit of layman's term, just talk to what that would mean for the classroom experience, especially for our K-3 students? So when you're talking about, I understand what you're saying, that, you know, when you have 12 standards in there and the topic is only hit, but how does that look in our classrooms? How do you envision that impacting our students?
Well, these are end of year standards. And so we don't have to front load standards in every single unit throughout the year. Students have to master them by the end of the year. And so as you plan instruction, you plan for that end of year. But we also have these assured experiences for
Is in front of me, so I'll save you this 732. But for example, you mentioned the opinion pieces. Value, great, wonderful, want to hear voice and whatnot. But there was also a lot of reduction in research and going out and cite, like some of those standards were pertaining to citing the sources and not pulling the evidence. There's a lot of claim and evidence, you know, SBAC type language in there, but research I found a lot. Full essay was reduced a bit. So just the kind of piggybacking a little bit on almost like the deliverable or the products seem to change from complete processes and research-based and more opinions and more explanatory versus what I might say are skills that they might need in those higher level classes. So just as well as the art piece though too. So that's just one example of what I noticed that was a little concerning. I do want to piggyback on the interview thing. I think when you actually look at the breakdown of that piece in 8th grade, the skills, so to speak, wasn't obviously there's the human impact of sitting down with someone and sharing that experience and getting to know what that was like for them and being able to reflect on that and then report back on it. But it was also skills-based and construct the interview process, construct your interview questions, right? Come back and kind of assimilate that into something. Now we're going to listen, right? It becomes more passive. We're going to listen to an interview that's recorded. So there's like 5 steps come down to like 2 steps. And so not only are you missing now that human piece of someone sitting in front of you, and whether it's a Holocaust survivor or not, or some other meaningful opportunity to engage in sitting with someone and going through that process. I know it's a small change. I don't know if written out small change, but I think it's a meaningful change that students had in that 8th grade. And intergenerational, doesn't have to be a Holocaust survivor. I think to her point is could you apply that going forward, and a little bit of a reduction in that. So just some of my thoughts while I gave Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly some time for her thoughts. And are you ready to come back?
Can I first ask a clarifying
Question?
question?
Sure, you absolutely can.
So
Sorry.
in terms of the research in the essay, when you said there was a reduction, what grade levels are you referring to?
I'll have to get back to you. I
just didn't know if
bring
it
all
was
that.
in the K-5 realm or in 612.
It was in, go ahead.
There's definitely a reduction in essays in grade 5 for sure, and I think grade 6 as well, if I'm remembering.
We'll look at that. We had to make sure, and again, this was part of the work that we did over the past couple of weeks, that all 3 writing types were addressed, plus any subgenres within it. So I think you'll only see about 2 opinion pieces per grade level. That's what we sort of strive for. Lots of informational and explanatory. What we did was, in order to be able to, for example, I forget which grade level it is, but I can look. They were doing research. It was animal research, but instead of writing a research paper, they're writing an opinion piece, right? An opinion letter, because otherwise they wouldn't fit that in. So we had to kind of balance to make sure that they had experience with all three writing types throughout the year. And again, this spirals from year to year. So we can look at it again, but again, I just wanted you to know that that was the rationale, because we have to adhere to the standards and make sure that we're balanced there.
Prioritize the standards, so it lets you to the
Yeah.
product. So I understand.
But thank you.
Max and Kennelly.
All right, I'm gonna try to go rapid fire through some of these and then others I'll just send to you. The portfolio units, is there anything significant in terms of what changes when it's a one semester course versus a 1 year course? In other words, like, does the first semester have bear one responsibility and the second semester bears a second responsibility, or how does that look?
I don't believe so, but Jenny, maybe you want to.
I think we discussed it was the number of pieces. That's also, it's really much the same process. It's just obviously in a shorter course, they don't produce as many pieces that can potentially go into the portfolio.
Thank you. I was wondering what the decision is regarding why the citation styles are all in there. Why is ELA having to take up that load and not being able to focus on MLA?
Well, there is some content work in there, and so we want to make sure that for ELA, they're focusing on one, but if they're bringing in other work from their other disciplines in the portfolio, then that requires a different citation.
So essentially, if it's becoming a nonfiction, more social studies type paper.
I think the idea was that if they were going to be choosing a piece for the portfolio from another discipline, then it's a different
for the discipline.
citation.
I
So
got
they're
that.
not responsible for teaching it, but they are responsible for adhering to the one that matches and supports that discipline.
I also wanted to clarify that the acting and performance studio courses are counting as humanities and not English. Okay, and I actually
Yeah.
I couldn't find them on the website, and I'm sure it probably was easy and I ran out of time. But in terms of doing any kind of comparison of the previous iteration, where would those be found?
You're not going to be able to do a comparison. This was all through COVID, when I think things were being proposed, and I guess it never happened. And so we had to search ourselves. And so what you're seeing now really truly is a first read. So there was a proposed document, but it never got approved. This was prior to us, but that's the story that we were researching and heard.
So we're offering the acting classes with an unapproved curriculum? And I say this with a child who took all four, so.
Yeah,
Really?
apparently. We're doing a good job, though.
I absolutely, I completely agree. I just feel a little better now about the fact that I couldn't find them.
Couldn't find it. Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. One thing you mentioned about the grammar, which I actually think is something a parent might even be interested in, because the question I was going to ask was, is there a single document that tracks the progression? That's what I was wondering exactly. I think that'd be interesting. I assume it because you mentioned that at the beginning of what you were saying, that there is now a grammar skills document, because that would be valuable both for teachers and parents.
There is. I just have to make it pretty.
Please do.
Okay. It's here.
And then
It was very enlightening. It's a really great thing to do. And I did want to do it. We just ran out of time. And it really did kind of open up some of the decisions that we had to make regarding which ones get spiraled and that sort of thing. Somebody's got to own something. And so even though it doesn't show up after second grade, we need to make sure that, and the teachers say this, we need to know students were taught that, and we have to own it. So I will have it for you.
And on that topic, what are we doing to support teachers with this instruction?
It's interesting. In terms of grammar, there has to be grammar professional learning. Yeah, there's a lot of terms in the standards that if you don't use them every day to revise your writing, you won't know what they are. And so there will be grammar professional learning along the way. Absolutely.
Thank you. And obviously, I don't know if that's going to come with a budget impact, if there are going to have to be supplies for that, but okay, so there's that. I did want to say that I appreciate, I know one of the changes I saw was expanding beyond the text to self connections. And I appreciated that, that you made that change. Saying a lot. Again, it's 3 pages.
We have a document of all of your questions, and we did respond to each of them. I know we didn't hand it to you, but we made the changes in the document, so we are ready. We went line by line, and so I want to make sure that they were all addressed.
Okay, because
that was
I
our
didn't get,
intention.
I didn't get the answers.
No, you didn't, but because we were going to give them to you tonight. I
Okay.
thought we were going to share
Then I
them with you
apologize because I
tonight.
ended up copying and pasting them into a new doc because I thought they hadn't gotten answered. So then I should wait.
Sure, Mrs. Flynn.
Thank you for the information on the teacher development. I'm sure that's going to be a huge piece of this as it gets rolled out. And please apologize if I missed this in the first read. But can you speak to any engagement you see in the future for parents? I know in a district that I previously worked in, especially for math, there was a lot of, and prior to COVID, there were a lot of like parent nights and things like that. I think with this large of a shift, I don't even think many parents realize the impact it'll have, especially those lower grades. And I think that that's where you really see a desire for parents to get in the school and meet the teachers and see spelling words and see grammar. Do you think that that will be a piece as you guys move forward?
Absolutely. Family engagement is going to be one of our 5 priority goals. We're going to be actually discussing it tomorrow with principals, and all of that work has to happen. It does. I mean, there has to be two-way communication. Parents need to be very much informed in order to know how they can support their children at home in the area of literacy and beyond. So we absolutely will make that happen.
Thank you. And updates on that would be great, just so that we can help get the word out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ready? Okay. Few more. No, one thing that I noticed is that nowhere in the secondary is, unless I missed it, do I recall any reference to vocabulary acquisition? And so I was wondering, are teachers left to their own devices to do as they please, or what is the approach towards that?
So the language standards.
Yes, so the language standards absolutely do identify some of the vocabulary that English teachers will be responsible for. And that's primarily, the tier 3 words that are in the English classroom. Those are quite different from tier 3 you would find in a science classroom and so on. We also are talking about identifying some of the tier 2 words that could actually be reinforced across all the disciplines. So for example, if students see these words all the time, if they're being asked to analyze a text or analyze and evaluate are words that cross all the disciplines. They're used often in directions on standardized tests or assessments given in a classroom, but students don't always necessarily know exactly what they're being asked to do when they're asked to analyze something. So looking at those tier 2 words, identifying those, is something that I would like to do working with other departments, 612, and making that more of an expectation in all the classrooms. English is not the only subject that uses words. So I think that, we want to actually share the joy.
Love that idea. But so then it's basically staying on the academic vocabulary is the idea at this point.
I think what I'm looking at a grade.
And I should add, I do notice the denotation connotation. So there is that idea of dealing with word nuance, but in terms of new words. Sorry for interrupting.
No worries at all. So I'm in the grade. That's a large document we created. So you're talking about the language, the content and skills with the language standards, and unpacking that to the point where we note for each of the courses the types of academic words, the content words the students will be learning, similar to what you see in K-5. Is that what?
Or I didn't know what teachers are currently doing on this front, or I know the idea of find 5 words in this chapter that you didn't know before and look up is a little bit debunked as a successful means of vocabulary reinforcement and acquisition, but I didn't know what was happening. And I mean, again, at least there are literally words listed pre-K through 5. I'm not suggesting that. I just wanted to throw out the topic of vocabulary acquisition and what's the district's attitude towards that, grades 6 through 12.
It has to be taught both explicitly and organically through the reading and writing process. So we can take another look at that in terms of noting a core set of words per unit. So this way we can be assured that those words are going to be taught explicitly, but then as we know, these words come up organically as well. So it's very similar to grammar. Some gets taught explicitly and some gets taught organically.
I would just add though, at the 6-12 level, the kids are going from one class to the next, right? Obviously, they're shifting and they're moving around a building, whereas at the elementary level, it's a little bit easier. There's one classroom teacher for all the core subject areas. So it's easier to have a list of words that are pulled out that they're seeing maybe throughout their day. And, you know, in order to remember a word, really own that word, they have to see it a minimum of 8 to 10 times for that to belong to the student, right? So it's not, I agree with you about the old idea of like, look up 5 words you don't know, right? That doesn't get anyone anywhere. It's just a check in the box. But because we have such a rich collection of book menus, text menus, from which teachers are choosing based on the students in front of them, trying to meet all of their diverse needs through reading experiences, it would be really incredibly difficult to identify a set group of words to put in, for example, Unit 1 of 9 college preparatory. That's going to be a very random thing that's not necessarily going to match what they're doing in that unit. So I agree with you that academic vocabulary is absolutely crucial. Without words, you're not reading anything or comprehending. But I think it's a mistake to think that grades 6 through 12, we're just going to put some words in a document and that's going to, and I know that's not what you're suggesting, but that's not going to fix the problem. That's why I'm looking, and I've started having conversations with people for ways to move forward in a more comprehensive and systematic way that's actually going to support academic vocabulary development and having kids hold on to those words rather than just, you know, being able to pass a quiz or whatever.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I didn't have a specific thing that, unlike other topics, you know, that I was advocating for. It was simply the fact that it's not really there at all that I wanted to ask about. The one other thing I'd push back on a little bit is that one huge difference of our middle schools is we do have a team model, and we financially pay for the fact that we have a team model, and this board has consistently supported maintaining that. But I would think that would be something, you know, you're talking about a system. I would definitely think that's something that you could tap into. Of it shouldn't just be coming up in English class. You know, you can use the word significant. I just picked one. You know, evaluate in multiple classes, and so that they're getting that. And again, the middle school has that advantage in a way that the high school doesn't. So just as a thought. Again, I'll send that with part of my follow-up questions. And then I think I narrowed it down to the rest I can send. I had 2 more. I had one question about, actually back to grade 9, that the Unit 1 references independent reading books and then short stories. And I was curious if the intention was that those are all books that they're choosing as opposed to a whole class discussion, because those are some very challenging books. And I don't see how that's appropriate for an independent read.
Where are you? I'm sorry.
Sorry, Unit 1 of grade 9.
In hindsight, maybe like little tabs and a printed version of this might have been better.
It says, for example, students will read works that address elements of identity and independent reading that honors student choice to their own preferences. And we're talking about their reading possibly A Midsummer Night's Dream, Antigone, To Kill a Mockingbird alone, and therefore not having whole class discussion. And that's what I was asking if that's, because that's what the language is telling me.
Sorry, yes. No, so the independent reading books would really be, for example, students, ninth grade students in particular are brought to the library. The librarian will do like book tastings with kids and have them choose a book that speaks to them that doesn't belong in a whole class novel discussion, but it's just something they're reading to develop their own goals and because it's something that they love. I saw a student today in the high school who was carrying around Where the Crawdads Sing. She's not reading it for class, she just picked it up and she was reading it. So independent reading really means that. It does not mean that they're reading independently any of those 6 or so books that are listed in the box above where you just were.
So, and that was my understanding of independent reading, but then in the paragraph above, this unit provides an opportunity to introduce, I guess it just doesn't, never mind. I'll follow up with that one. But again, I'm not, there is no reference made to the core text, I guess is what I was curious about with that particular unit. Last question I wanted to ask was regarding the literature of well-being, believe it or not. Because that is not even on the district website. When was that course approved? Because I have zero, and I'm sure that it must be my memory, I have zero recollection of that course.
This is really the course that was proposed. Actually, it was presented, it's my understanding, it was presented to the high school leadership team back in, I want to say the fall of 2019, if I'm getting the dates correct. And then it was slated to be presented to all of you, but it never was. So another course. It happens to be, by the way, though, one of the most popular courses in the high school English department. It's very well received and students do a lot of reading and discussing, and it's one of those courses that just speaks to like real life challenges kids are facing. So it's a very, very popular course. Many sections run of it, but sorry, it was never approved by you.
Sorry, and then I have to go out to Dr. Zavajanczyk. How is it that we have offered courses that the Board of Ed never approved? How is that happening?
We've gone through the program, sorry, James Zavajanczyk, Chief Academic Officer. We've gone through the program prior for all courses last year and tried to deactivate any that did not have a curriculum for them. There are a number that students were in already that we couldn't do, and all of these courses were prior to 2019 or during that year.
So there are more.
I believe we found them all.
Acting and the literature of well-being, and that's it?
There were some in other departments as well that have been deactivated and not offered this year.
So I obviously have to say that's a little upsetting. But I don't know, I'm not blaming it. I'm throwing that out into the ether, but that's not supposed to happen. Because I actually have I take a little issue with this course. I'm not quite sure what the role of the teacher is in that. And I also don't understand why I think that would be an amazing course in the health department to fulfill a health and safety that you're reading about your own personal well-being. I completely agree with you. I think that the content of it sounds fascinating. I don't think it belongs in the English department. Just because it involves reading doesn't make it part of the English department. So in fact, we are being asked to approve 4 new courses, not 3, because this is an unapproved course. We just happen to already be teaching it. And I'm going to need some convincing that this belongs in our department. And again, just because it involves and I've taken a look at the accompanying course list, which was very interesting. I acknowledge there's some fiction on there, and it's not like I'm looking to get rid of a course. I don't understand it in this department because obviously I'm passionate about the topic, about what we can instruct, and what high school English to me is about courses where the students need the teacher to access the text, to access the critical thinking. And this course does not strike me as overly belonging in a department I care an awful lot about. But I'll just leave that there unless there's something else you want to say.
Mrs. Guernsey.
So I've heard so many good things about that course, and I just wanted one clarification. Is the literature of well-being running this year or not running? Because I had heard that the sections weren't full, so that wasn't intentional. It was that there are. Okay, thank you.
Just to your point, I think it'll be difficult to have kids, if we put it in the health, it would be an elective in the health department, which would then not count as a humanities, which would probably discourage students from signing up, and the course would probably die.
And if, again, we've got courses like acting, which count as humanities course. If this was to be double bucketed as a humanities and health course, and actually, quite frankly, I think some students might enjoy this as a health option as opposed to being,
I'm not
well, I'm not going to leave it there.
I'm not sure if it would, as is, meet the health requirement standards.
It would also have to be taught by a health teacher, wouldn't it?
Correct.
Yeah, it would.
Which I don't think they would have a hard time doing. I don't think this idea of the well-being, but I will still say, if a course dies, I'm not looking to kill a course. I love the fact that it's popular. It's not exactly that I'm criticizing the course. It's that I don't see this belonging in the English department. It's that simple.
I would love the opportunity to just gather a little bit more information from the teachers who are actually teaching it. I just haven't been here long enough to really speak explicitly about that. So if that's all right with you, I will get more
Absolutely.
information from the teachers.
And I'd also say I would appreciate it if somebody could speak to our two head principals about how this got incorporated into a program of studies. And again, in the past, they have done a course with a very explicit pending BOE approval. But didn't happen here.
Anyone else? Oh, sorry, Mrs. Lynn.
Just a small question. The literature course Call of the Wild, is that offered at both high schools or just one of our high schools?
Currently, it's only offered, well, it is offered at both high schools. It has only really been populated at one of them.
Is there a reason behind that? Is there a lack of, it just, for whatever reason,
I think
doesn't,
the particular teacher at Ludlow just has.
has a hold on it?
Yes.
That's what I thought, but thank you.
I was just mad that I took Called Wild at Ward in 1991.
Took a similar course, so I was wondering the discrepancy between high schools.
Mr. Peterson, do you want to circle back?
No, I don't want to, I do appreciate the work that the English department has done. I appreciate it a lot. I think that this is a phenomenal document, and I don't want my flying off the handle earlier to be construed in any way negative of this document. I have strongly held beliefs. I think we've gone a little too far in the postmodern direction of tearing things apart and looking for meaning rather than just enjoyment. But that's an individual viewpoint. I'm one of 9. It's not something that's going to push me against voting for this. Something that I feel firmly about, but I do want to say I do appreciate the work that the department has done, and I look forward to seeing this implemented.
Okay, before I move to, oh, sorry, Ms. Guernsey.
Sorry, so just one other thing that I had spoken offline with several staff members here. I was wondering for the public if you could speak to the reasoning behind, because I know several board members had asked about the possibility of offering levels for grade 8 in the same way that we do for math. So could you speak to that philosophy of not providing levels, or, you know, the decision to not pursue that, even though it was something that our board was obviously, or several members of our board were really interested in seeing?
Just before Janine or Julie go, just for clarification of the public in terms of level versus course, math is, we offer different courses in the middle school. We don't level those courses. So we don't have, for example, we do have an Algebra 1 honors, to be clear, but we don't have a corresponding Algebra 1 course in 8th grade or 7th grade. That's college prep, for example. So there are different courses, but not levels within the middle school.
This was a subject that we did broach with teachers, with administrators at the middle school level. This was not something the majority were interested in at any point. They wanted to make sure that the current curriculum that we have or the curriculum that we're writing, that we're able to meet students' needs. We should be able to meet their needs at all levels of rigor in a current ELA course. And so that is what we pursued. If at any point in the future that changes or the board wants us to continue to pursue, we have a lot of research to do. We have to research other districts. We have to research models. It's a very different model.
Thank you.
Just piggyback. I think for the public and just for myself as a parent with children, in middle school and entering middle school, I just take a little bit of, not issue with that response, but I think in the same iteration, we have students that are seeing children being offered different course levels for one subject matter. So if you have students that, for whatever reason, don't have an interest in math and don't want to, but do have an interest in the humanities, we want to make sure all of our kids' needs are met. And when I'm seeing only, one chapter of Harry Potter being read, when I know that there are probably students in that 5th grade classroom that could read the entire series or have already, just making sure that we are being cognizant of not only just preparing our children on a skills basis, but also just utilizing the time and space we have with them to expose them to material the same way we do in math, that we do that in our ELA courses.
Okay, last call. Anything before we go into the process here? Sorry. Yep.
Just as a new member of the board, I don't know if this is through the chair or to Mr. Testani. I know that past votes have been iterations of K through 5, 6 through 12. Are you thinking moving forward it's going to look like that, or what are the processes going to look like?
Yeah, so I was just going to give everyone one last call here if they wanted anything else on this before I get into process. So what I have noted from this evening are possible 2 amendments to what we have in our backup. You said there was something in grade 5 on page 51 that was struck out that is meant to be unstruck. And in 9H, the 4 and 2 will become inversed. So just for the board and for you too, and we should talk about this, just as drafted for next week as a recommended motion, which we can do it however everyone feels comfortable, but just as drafted, it's just simply approval pre-K through grade 12 per the December 6th backup. So that would be what was in front of us tonight. So if we're going to make changes, further changes to that, that's going to have to change because it's not going to be per December 6th enclosure 1, right? Which it sounds like there might be changes. So we'll have to work together on that between us. And then also for the board, it has been done, separated pre-K through 5 and 6-12 in the past. If people want to do that, we can do that. If that's how everyone wants to roll, if you want it separated out, or if you just want it to be one, unless Mr. Testani has any input on that, I want everyone to feel comfortable going into next week. Go ahead.
If we separate it up and we approve one and don't approve another, how much time do they need when the second part's approved to get things in action? I mean, they have to have a deadline to order materials and train, and what is that deadline for them?
So just want to put it out on the table. We don't have to go down that path. I just, again, want to give everyone laid out how we're proceeding at this point in case anyone had any input on that. We can just keep it the way that it is if that's what we want to do.
Yeah, my only question would be, what would be the purpose to separate them at this point? I think,
Really, when you separate the vote, it's because you're comfortable with one set, but maybe one question, but maybe not the other. So, and then if you're not comfortable with one, then you have to vote the whole thing down. So I'm not predicting that. I just want to get past what we can here.
so my question is, if we separate, I'm just trying to put it all out there, and we pass pre-K 5, and we do not pass 6-12 because X, Y, Z. And we go back to the teachers and everyone, and they say, this is the document. Then what? Now I think we're kind of treading in a very dangerous area.
I do have it drafted right now as pre-K through 12. So,
And also, can I add for the record, it is kindergarten that needs that change, not for grade 5. We want to put that standard back in on page 51. Sorry about that.
I inverted my K in 5.
We tend to do the same thing.
Kindergarten, page 51.
Kindergarten, page 51.
So I'll work with you offline and Mr. Testani in order to change this. So just for board, are those literally the only 2 changes you are expecting to see for next week?
Those were the typos we saw.
Right.
If we truly need to go back and revise, not pre-K 5, but 6-12, we would absolutely need more time with teachers. We can't single-handedly do this.
Right.
We need to bring people together, and so we would have to probably talk about that.
Okay, so literally it's going to be this enclosure with those 2 changes only.
Yes.
I'll talk to you about process. What I think we'll do is we'll just upload it all again, maybe in blue or something, just show those 2 changes and it would be per the enclosure of December 12th then or something, or we'll work on the language. I just want to make sure what we have in the backup is what we're actually voting on.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
I don't know if this is the time, but I think we need to keep it as one, because even if you don't approve one, like Mr. Tassani said, how much real changes can they possibly do without going into talking to everyone else and basically going back to the drawing board to rebuild it over a few things? And that's just going to delay the whole process itself.
So before I understood, for new board members, there was a point in time where this was going to end up being separated because we had planned on voting on pre-K 5 and separating them. So now we've all kind of caught back up. So there was a point in time they were going to be separated.
It's a new thing.
Yeah, it's a new thing.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily advocating for it, just clarifying for myself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all.
All right, we will go to public comment. If there is no public comment, then I will move to adjourn. Recommend a motion that the special meeting of the Board of Education adjourn. Motion by Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mr. Lee. All in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the special meeting. And we will see you all back here, same bat channel, at 7:30 for our town hall tomorrow. So come on out, everybody, town hall. Thank you. Bye.